Maybe I'll write it with cosine this time, but same thing.
Is that on the notes? Yeah,
So there's your notes for today.
what?
You have this page, right? Notes 4. And this is, if you look, the back is already has our favorite equation on there. So it's really just 3 examples that we're going to work through.
A cosine B AO.
Right? Because now we have hopefully a good understanding of what A, B, C, and D do. So now we're going to go backwards, given some information, write an equation. So it's a Jeopardy day. Here's the answer. What was the question? Number 1, state an equation of the sine curve. So I'm going to go ahead and write the equation of a sine curve. And then my job is to figure out, well, what's A, B, C, and D? Period is 3 pi. How does that help me? That helps me with B. Like I worded that carefully. That's not B. It helps me with B. Because period is equal to 2 pi over B. So 3 pi equals 2 pi over B. I think this is going to be the hardest one. The rest are going to be straightforward. So if I move things around, cross multiply if I need to. So what's B going to equal? 2/3. Amplitude of 3. There's an easy one. So where does that go? That's A. So we put 3 out front. That's a good question. It would have to say like a flip. Yeah, good question. We know it's not negative because it doesn't say a flip. A right phase shift or horizontal shift of pi over 6. So how do I accomplish right pi over 6?
Negative or minus pi over 6.
Yeah. Minus pi over 6. And then a vertical translation of down 2. Minus 2. Small point here. If you leave it like that, I'm going to take off a point. Because y equals good. You've had teachers before take off a point. Good for them. It's so frustrating when a student makes a 98 or 99 and the only thing they did was leave off y equals. But it says equation, so you got to give an equation. So that one wasn't too bad. Why don't you try number 2? Yeah, no, it's just the first one though. Try number 2. Any questions on that one?
Wait, needs to be negative 2 in the middle, right? Because it's translating to the right.
No, I was trying to think to the left.
Left phase shift. So plus 2.
I can't read.
Yeah, that's right. Your pre-cal was right. Your literacy was struggling there.
Yeah.
Number 3.
Yo.
Oh, kind of a word problem here. I mentioned this to one class. They're like, when do we actually use this? I'm like, well, there's lots of things in nature that are cyclical, including the number of hours of sunlight, cyclical, meaning they follow a sine curve. Including the number of hours of sunlight in San Diego can be modeled by this function where h is in hours, t is days, and t equals 1 is January 1st. So this tells us how many hours of sunlight you get per day. And I mean, you guys know this, right? In the summer, it's lighter, longer. In the winter, it gets dark at 5 o'clock, it feels like. The number of hours of sunlight changes, and it changes by a sine wave.
When there's no school, I get even less.
What is the period of this model? So period equals 2 pi over b.
Oh, that's not fun.
What's b equal to?
360.
What's b is equal to 2 pi over 365. So this is going to look kind of weird. So the period is 2 pi over 365. So if I keep it, change it, flip it, I get 365. I like that question. Does this period make sense for this situation? Why yes? There's 365 days in a year. So, unless it's leap year. Or the 0.25 thing. There's 365 days in a year. So one cycle, one period, is 365 days. What is the maximum number of hours of daylight in San Diego according to this model? Well, I don't really want to like graph the whole thing because that would be... So,
Look it up.
I don't want to look it up. Is there a way I could know? Let's think about this.
I mean, I'm sure there is. Yeah.
What's 12 if we think about the graph?
12 hours in, like,
12 is sort of the midline.
Probably about right.
So that means on average there's 12. The amplitude's 2.4. So the maximum, I don't know where it happens, but it's at
Minus 2-ish hours.
14.4. So the maximum number of hours is the midline plus the amplitude.
12 hours on average,
Or the average plus the amplitude.
66.
14.4 hours. What's the minimum number of hours of daylight in San Diego?
That's 9.6.
9.6.
Quick math.
Oh,
That's actually a pretty, like, substantial.
it is. Difference of 5 hours, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, I mean, if you think about
And I don't know if this
Alaska
is accurate or not.
and stuff like that, they just have
The further
cold
north you
winters.
go, the more extreme it is, right? You go to Alaska,
Yes.
you have days that are, I don't know if they're
You
completely
don't have
dark,
days.
but you have an hour of daylight.
Alaska would
You have a
be
couple
like-
months that are just nights.
would be like-
Yeah, and then you have a couple months where it's
Just
all
days.
daylight.
Yeah.
And so,
That's
yes,
pretty
the further
tricky
north
with
you
your
go.
Sleep cycle. You gotta like block out your.
Part D, what's the average number of hours in San Diego? Shouldn't that say like hours of daylight? But
Just 12, because that's the...
yeah, the average number of hours in a day in San Diego is 24. But the average number of daylight
Yeah.
is 12.
Well, you know, except for on a leap year.
I mean, average.
You gotta read those questions carefully.
Wait, what's the exception here?
What's the average number of hours?
A high school.
There would
Of
be-
daylight.
There would be one teacher that'd be like, oh, actually,
There was just one
you
day.
didn't read it right.
There was just one day in 1980.
Part E, use a graphing calculator to find out how many days it takes for the number of hours of daylight to exceed 12 hours per day.
Wait, why is it 12?
Because that's like just the midline.
Like the midline. Yeah.
My favorite.
The midline would be the average.
Because the highest would be 14.4 because you're using the average plus the extra 2.
Alright, this question is maybe hard to make sense of, so let's graph it and see if then we can make sense of the question. 2.4 sine of, oh, this is going to be a mess. Fraction bar if you like.
What?
Oh, this calculator didn't have the fraction bar. That's
What
okay.
joke did you find on Reddit?
I definitely want to be in radians, and my window,
Wait, so we can use the iron indicator.
I think I want to go 0 to 365. Maybe I'll make my scale 30, like kind of a monthly scale almost. My Y scale, we already said we needed to get up to 14.4.
That's
I think that makes sense. It looks like an upside down cosine wave. At January 1, we start with not much daylight. In the middle of the year, summer,
Not much daylight.
we have more daylight, and then it goes down again. Now the question was, When do we get to exceed 12? Well,
Like 6.
it's like I'm going to put 12 on the graph so I can see. So when do we exceed 12? We exceed 12 right there.
Yeah.
Right there. I need
so
to know where right there is though.
3.
Yesterday.
Maybe month 3.
This is a calculator. Yeah, it looks about month 3. But if I go to second calc, I can find the intersection of those two.
They give you like a weird number.
So first curve, I want y1. Second curve, I want y2. And then guess, well, the first time it happens is over here.
Yeah.
So 79.999, but that doesn't really, it's not how we count days. So what day is that? The 80th day.
So
Oh, in which month does this occur?
369 and just be like month.
Well,
Point.
January has 31. February has
Do you ever get why they don't all
28.
have 31?
March has,
Why are they all
It'd
gonna
be
be
in March.
different?
it doesn't really matter, it's in March.
No matter what.
Who decided that the months would have different number of days?
Will there be a question like that on the test? Because we don't have a calculator.
Right, if you don't have a calculator, no.
Yeah.
You know how many people I know that don't know like the amount of
Me.
months
I have no
or
idea.
days in a month? It's a cool knuckle
That's
trick.
tricky, there's the knuckle
Every
trick.
knuckle is the 31st, and every dip is either 30 or 28.